The wind in Wyoming territory doesn't just howl. In the winter of 1887, it screamed. It was a physical thing, a monster made of ice and fury that tore across the plains, ripping the life from anything left exposed. And on a hard wooden bench in the lonesome Cheyenne train station, Elizabeth Montgomery was being left exposed. They called her Libby. Back in Philadelphia, she was a nurse, a good one. She knew how to set a bone, deliver a baby, and hold the hand of a dying man. She knew the difference between a clean wound and one that would turn to poison. She also knew what it felt like to have her life ripped away. She clutched a small leather bag. Inside was everything she owned in the world. $3, a faded photograph of her parents, and a set of surgical tools that felt heavier than lead. Her dreams had turned as cold as the air she was breathing, each puff of white a ghost of the future she'd lost. The last train had gone. The next wasn't coming until morning, if the storm allowed it. The scandal, they'd called it. Dr. Harrison, a man with a fine reputation and rotten hands, had tried to force himself on her. Libby, small but not weak, had fought back. She'd grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy porcelain bedpan, and broke his nose with a crack that echoed in the ward. But in a world of powerful men, a broken nose was an accusation, and a woman's word was just noise. They didn't believe her. The hospital fired her. The story spread like a disease, and every door in Philadelphia was slammed shut in her face. So she ran. She bought a ticket west, to a land where they said a person's past didn't matter, only the work of their hands. But her money ran out in Cheyenne. The boarding house owner had looked at her empty purse and pointed to the door. Now, she sat on this bench, watching her future freeze over. She wondered, in a distant, numb sort of way, if this was it, if she would simply be a frozen statue found in the morning. Then a sound cut through the wind's scream. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, crunching on the frozen ground. A figure emerged from the swirling snow, a giant on a magnificent black stallion. The man was built like a mountain, wrapped in a heavy coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He dismounted with an easy grace, tying his horse to the hitching post. He moved with a confidence that spoke of money and power. His boots were expensive. His stride was sure. He pushed through the station door, bringing a gust of winter with him. "Evening, miss," he said. His voice was deep, warm, with a hint of Texas in it. It was a voice that didn't belong in this frozen wasteland. He touched the brim of his hat. His eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to see everything. He saw her worn but quality clothes. He saw the educated way she held herself, even as she shivered uncontrollably. And his eyes landed on her medical bag. Libby tried to answer, but her teeth chattered like dice in a cup. All she could manage was a nod. The man's expression softened with something that looked like concern. He was maybe 30, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes were kind. Too kind. "Name's Jackson Thornton," he said, pulling off thick leather gloves. "I own the Double T Ranch, about 20 miles north of here." He looked her up and down again, a slow, calculating gaze. "Been in town on business, was heading home when I saw you." He paused, his gaze fixed on her bag. "Are you a doctor, miss?" Her voice was a frozen whisper. Nurse. Elizabeth Montgomery, from Philadelphia." Jack Thornton's eyes widened, but not with surprise. It was something else. Recognition. A flash of triumph, quickly hidden. "A trained nurse," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "Well, that's rarer than gold out here." He took a step closer. The warmth coming off him was like a fireplace. "Miss Montgomery, you're going to freeze to death if you stay here. This storm's a killer, and this station ain't heated." He gestured vaguely. "Please, let me take you somewhere warm." Libby flinched. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Men who offered help usually wanted payment in a currency she refused to trade, but she was desperate. Her body was shutting down. I I have no money for a hotel, she stammered, the words tasting like shame. That's not your concern, Jack said, his tone firm, leaving no room for argument. Getting you warm and fed, that's what matters now. We can sort the rest later. Before she could protest, he shrugged out of his massive coat. It smelled of leather, pine soap, and a clean, masculine scent that was dizzying. He wrapped it around her shoulders. The weight and warmth of it felt like salvation. It was so heavy, so encompassing, she felt like a child being swaddled. Can you walk? He asked. She tried. Her legs were logs, frozen and unresponsive. She stumbled. Without a word, Jack Thornton scooped her up into his arms. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, tucking her against his solid chest. He grabbed her medical bag in the same motion. The hotel's just across the street, he said, his voice rumbling through his chest, right into her ear. He carried her toward the door, into the blizzard's teeth. We'll get you warm, get some food in you, and then you can tell me what brings a woman like you all the way out to Wyoming. As he carried her across the street, the world a swirl of white around them, Libby felt a terrifying thought. She was in the arms of a complete stranger, a powerful man who had appeared out of nowhere, and for the first time in months, she felt completely, utterly safe, which was the most dangerous feeling of all. The Cattleman's Hotel was the jewel of Cheyenne. Rich ranchers and railroad barons walked its carpeted floors. When Jack Thornton strode in, carrying a half-frozen woman wrapped in his coat, the entire lobby fell silent. A thin man behind the desk, Perkins, rushed forward. Mr. Thornton, sir, what happened? Found her at the station, Perkins, near frozen, Jack's voice boomed, echoing in the sudden quiet. He didn't put Libby down. He held her tighter. I need your best room. And send up a hot meal, coffee, and a pile of blankets. Now. He added, almost as an afterthought, and see if Doc Williams is in town. Have him on standby. Right away, sir. Room 12, Perkins said, fumbling for a key. Second floor. Jack took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the whispers that followed them like snakes. Libby was barely aware of the stairs, the judgment. The warmth of the hotel was a painful shock, sending pins and needles into her fingers and toes. It was the feeling of coming back to life, and it hurt. He carried her into a large, beautiful room. A fire was already laid in the hearth. He set her down gently in a plush chair by the fireplace, his movements precise and careful. He immediately knelt and got the fire roaring to life. The flames leaped, casting dancing shadows on his determined face. The hotel will send up some women's clothes, he said, his back to her. Yours are damp. We need to get you dry. A knock at the door announced a young boy with a tray. Hot soup, steaming coffee, bread, and a stack of thick wool blankets. Jack tipped the boy a coin that made his eyes go wide, then poured Libby a cup of coffee. His hands, for a man so large, were surprisingly steady. Slowly, he cautioned. Too much heat too fast can be a shock to the system. She sipped the coffee, the liquid fire spreading through her chest. Her mind was starting to clear from the fog of cold. You seem to know a thing or two about medicine yourself, she observed, her voice stronger now. Jack gave a small, grim smile. You learn things on a ranch. A man gets thrown from a horse, a steer gores another. You can't always wait for a doctor who's 100 miles away. He sat in the chair opposite her. But I'm no trained nurse. What really brought you west, Miss Montgomery, if you don't mind my asking? She looked at his face in the firelight. There was no deception there. Or if there was, he was a master at hiding it. After what he'd done, he deserved an answer. A version of the answer, at least. I worked in a hospital in Philadelphia, she said, choosing her words with care. There was trouble. A doctor who wouldn't take no for an answer. Jack's jaw tightened. A flicker of something cold and hard passed through his kind eyes. A man forced himself on you. It wasn't a question. He tried, Libby corrected him, a spark of her old fire returning. I broke his nose with a bedpan. A corner of Jack's mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. Good for you. I hope it hurt like hell. It did, she said, and almost smiled back. But it cost me my career, my reputation. I thought, out here, maybe my past wouldn't matter so much. It doesn't, Jack said, his voice a low growl. Out here we judge people by what they do, not by lies whispered back east. He leaned forward, his intensity filling the space between them. A trained nurse. You have no idea what you're worth in this territory, Miss Montgomery. Another knock. This time, a hotel maid with an armful of clothes. A simple dress of dark blue wool, undergarments, stockings, even a pair of sturdy boots. Mrs. Patterson in room 8 sent these, sir. Said any woman caught in a storm like this deserves a helping hand. Thank Mrs. Patterson for me, Jack said, standing. I'll wait downstairs while you change, Miss Montgomery. Get yourself warm and eat something. We'll talk more later. He walked to the door. His hand was on the knob when Libby's voice stopped him. Mr. Thornton, why? She asked, the question raw. Why are you doing all this? You don't know me. Jack paused, his back still to her. The firelight cast his large frame in silhouette. Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone, he said quietly. His voice was different now, softer, with a strange, deep sadness. He turned to face her, and his eyes were burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. And maybe, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, because I've been praying for someone exactly like you to come to Wyoming. Someone? Like her? A disgraced nurse with nothing to her name? A healer, he clarified, though it didn't feel like a clarification at all. My ranch. We have accidents. Men get hurt. I've lost good men, strong men, because there was no one to tend them. He took a step back into the room. But it's more than that. His eyes locked on hers. I've been looking for someone with strength, courage. He gave that ghost of a smile again, but this time it was chilling. Someone who'd break a man's nose with a bedpan, rather than be broken herself. With that, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Libby sitting by the fire, the heavy warmth of his coat still on her shoulders, and a cold dread seeping into her bones. He hadn't just stumbled upon her. He had been looking for her. And the way he said it didn't sound like a job offer. It sounded like he'd been shopping. Libby stood in the middle of the luxurious room, the borrowed blue dress feeling like a costume. The warmth of the fire couldn't touch the chill that had settled deep inside her. He'd been looking for her. The hotel clerk had mentioned a woman with medical training. He'd gone to the station, hoping to find her. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a calculated interception. She looked around the room. The fine furniture, the roaring fire, the meal waiting on the table. This wasn't charity. It was an investment. He was a rich man, a rancher, Jackson Thornton. He didn't do things by accident. She ate the soup, her hands shaking slightly. She had to think. Back in Philadelphia, she'd learned to see beyond the surface of things. A smiling doctor could have poison in his heart. A clean ward could hide filthy secrets. This felt the same. Perfect on the surface, but with something wrong underneath. When he returned an hour later, she had composed herself. She was wearing the blue dress, her hair was brushed and braided, and she sat in the chair like a guest, not a charity case. Feeling better? He asked, his smile warm and genuine. If it was an act, he was the finest actor she'd ever seen. Much better, thank you, she said, her tone polite but distant. Mr. Thornton, you've been more than generous, but I can't impose any longer. If you could just point me toward a place that might be hiring. I already have, he interrupted smoothly, taking the seat opposite her. I'm hiring. I told you I need a nurse for my ranch, the Double T. He laid it all out. Good pay, her own cabin. All the medical supplies she could ever need. He spoke of his men, good, hardworking cowboys who got banged up regularly. Broken bones, snake bites, branding iron burns. It sounded like a dream, a safe haven, a chance to do the work she was born to do, without the judgment and politics of the city. It was everything she had hoped to find in the West. It was too perfect. "What would you expect in return, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, her voice level. "Honest work for honest pay," he said, his expression serious. "Tend my men. Help with the livestock if needed. Nothing more." He seemed to read her mind, his eyes softening. "Libby. May I call you Libby? I am not the kind of man who takes advantage of a woman in a vulnerable position. Your personal life would be your own. Your job would be entirely professional." She wanted to believe him, desperately. Every instinct screamed that this was a lifeline she'd be a fool to refuse, but another, quieter instinct whispered a warning. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked directly. He actually chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. "Smart. I like that." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "All right, the whole truth. The Double T is isolated, 20 miles to Cheyenne. The winters are brutal. The summers are scorching. Most of the year you'd be the only woman there besides Martha, my cook's wife." He paused. "It can be lonely." "I've been lonely in a city full of people," Libby said quietly. "That doesn't scare me." "Good," he said. "There's something else. My family, we have money, a great deal of it. My father was in shipping. I've made my own fortune in railroads and cattle." He looked her straight in the eye. "A single woman, going to live on a wealthy bachelor's ranch. People will talk. They'll say you're a gold digger, that you're trying to trap a husband." Her chin went up. "Let them talk. I know who I am." "I believe you do," he said softly. "But I wanted you to be prepared." It was all so reasonable. He was being open, honest, laying all the potential problems on the table. He was treating her like an equal, a professional colleague. He was everything Dr. Harrison was not. So why did she feel like a fly being invited into the most beautiful parlor she'd ever seen? She thought about her options: freezing on a bench, trying to find work in a rough mining camp, fending off advances from lonely, drunk men, or this: a beautiful, isolated ranch, a powerful protector, a job that was made for her. It wasn't a choice at all. "When would you want me to start?" she asked. A brilliant, triumphant smile lit up his entire face. It transformed him from handsome to breathtaking. "Does that mean you'll take the position?" "It means I'll try it," she said, maintaining a sliver of control. "If it doesn't work out, for either of us, I'll move on. No hard feelings." "Fair enough," he said, standing and extending his hand. It was a deal, struck between two professionals. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and possessive. A jolt, like lightning, shot up her arm. She saw from the look in his eyes that he felt it too. "Welcome to the Double T, Nurse Montgomery," he said. The next morning, the world was a pristine blanket of white. Jack bought her everything she would need: a warm sheepskin coat, sturdy boots, wool trousers for riding, a hat. He waved away her protests about the cost. "An advance on your salary," he said, with that disarming grin. The ride to the ranch was breathtaking. Snow-covered plains stretched to the feet of majestic purple mountains. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue. Jack was an engaging guide, pointing out landmarks, telling stories of the land. He was charming, intelligent, and attentive. As they rode, Libby started to relax. Maybe she had been too suspicious. Maybe this was real. Maybe her luck had finally turned. Then they crested a hill, and he spoke 2 words. "There she is!" Libby gasped. It wasn't a ranch, it was a kingdom. The Double T sprawled across a massive valley, a self-contained town nestled against the protective arm of a low mountain. A huge main house of log and stone stood at the center, smoke curling from a half-dozen chimneys. Surrounding it were a massive barn, a bunkhouse that looked bigger than the hotel in Cheyenne, a blacksmith shop, corrals, and countless other outbuildings. It was a fortress of industry and wealth in the middle of nowhere. "It's incredible," she whispered. "My father built the main house," Jack said with quiet pride. "I've added the rest. Everything a man could need is right here. We rarely have to go to town for anything." As they rode into the main yard, men poured out of the buildings, dozens of them, weather-beaten, tough-looking men, all stopping their work to stare. It wasn't the curious, friendly welcome she'd expected. It was watchful, silent. "Boys!" Jack's voice boomed. "This is Miss Elizabeth Montgomery. She's our new nurse." A ragged cheer went up, but it felt forced, rehearsed. A grizzled foreman with cold gray eyes stepped forward. "Tom Bradley, miss. I'm the foreman. Glad to have you." His handshake was like gripping a piece of granite. He didn't smile. Jack led her not toward the main house, but to a small, perfect cabin set off by itself. "This will be your home," he said, opening the door. It was perfect. A cozy living area with a fireplace already lit. A small, neat bedroom. A kitchen stocked with food. It was warm and welcoming. Too welcoming. "Martha, Cookie's wife, got it ready for you," Jack explained. But the real shock was behind another door. He opened it, and Libby's breath caught in her throat. It was a fully equipped medical clinic, an examination table, gleaming surgical instruments in glass cases, shelves lined with bottles of carbolic acid, laudanum, quinine, bandages, sutures, more supplies than she'd had at the hospital in Philadelphia. It was a doctor's dream. "Jack," she breathed, turning to him, her mind reeling. This must have cost a fortune. When did you—" "A good nurse is worth a fortune," he said simply. But his eyes betrayed him. There was a flicker of something. Anxiety? "I ordered most of it months ago. I told you. I've been looking for a long time." Months ago, before he even knew she existed. He'd built this shrine to medicine, waiting for a healer to arrive. It was flattering. It was also deeply, profoundly unsettling. It felt less like a workplace and more like a cage, specifically designed for her. Just then, Tom Bradley, the foreman, appeared at the door. He was supporting a young cowboy who was grimacing in pain. "Sorry to bother you so soon, miss," Bradley said, his voice flat. "Billy here had a run-in with a skittish colt, got his foot stepped on." "Bring him in," Libby said, her professional instincts taking over, a welcome relief from the swirl of confusion in her head. "Let's have a look at that." As she knelt to examine the boy's bruised and swelling foot, she was acutely aware of Jack and Bradley watching from the doorway. They weren't watching the patient. They were watching her. She worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the injury, bandaging it tightly, her hands moving with the practiced skill of years. The foot was badly bruised, but not broken. "Keep off it for a few days, Billy," she said gently, "and keep this bandage clean." When she looked up, Jack was smiling. It was a smile of immense satisfaction, the smile of a man who had just acquired a rare and valuable prize and found it to be in perfect working order. "What?" she asked, a new kind of chill running down her spine. "Nothing," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Just thinking this is going to work out even better than I'd hoped." That night, alone in her perfect cabin, the fire crackling in her perfect fireplace, Libby couldn't shake the feeling of being a doll in a dollhouse. Everything was beautiful, everything was provided for, but the walls were closing in. The ranch was too isolated, the men were too watchful, and Jack Thornton was too good to be true. She walked over to the window and looked out. The vast, empty landscape was bathed in moonlight. There were no other lights for as far as the eye could see. She was 20 miles from civilization, 20 miles from help. A soft knock came at her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Jack, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Martha's hot chocolate," he said with that easy smile. "Best in the territory." Thought you might like some. That's very thoughtful, she said, her voice tight. She couldn't refuse. She had to play the part. She opened the door wider. Please, come in. He settled into the chair by the fire as if he belonged there. So, how's the first day? He asked. It's been a lot to take in, she said carefully. The men have all been very correct. They're good men, he said, sipping his chocolate. Loyal. They know what I expect of them. There was a hard edge to the word loyal that she didn't like. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling fire. He was studying her again, with that intense, possessive gaze. Libby, he said finally, his voice low and serious. I want to be completely honest with you. When I found you at that station, it wasn't entirely by chance. She feigned surprise. What do you mean? The hotel clerk told me a nurse had been asking about work. He said she'd been turned away from the boarding house. I had a feeling you'd end up at the station. It was the only place left to go. He leaned forward. I went there looking for you, Libby. So the last piece of the fairy tale crumbled. He hadn't rescued a stranger. He had targeted a desperate woman. Why didn't you just say so? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Because I didn't want you to feel obligated, he said, his expression earnest. I wanted you to take the job because it was the right fit for you, not because you owed me anything. It was the perfect answer. The gentleman's answer. And it was a lie. She could feel it. He wanted her to feel obligated. He wanted her to feel grateful. He wanted her to feel that he was her savior. Her eyes drifted to the window again, to the endless, dark emptiness outside. She felt a sudden, suffocating wave of panic. She was trapped. She was completely and utterly at this man's mercy. Is there anything else I should know, Mr. Thornton? She asked, her hands clenched in her lap. He stood up, placing his empty mug on the mantelpiece. He walked towards her, stopping just a few feet away. The sheer size of him filled the small room. Just this, he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur that made the hair on her arms stand up. I'm attracted to you, Libby. I think you know that. I have been since the moment I saw you, so cold and alone, yet with so much fight left in your eyes. He took another step. But I give you my word. Your job is safe, regardless of what happens between us. I will never pressure you. She could feel the heat coming off his body. She could smell the pine soap and the cold night air clinging to his coat. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was a test. He was promising not to pressure her while doing exactly that with his presence, his proximity, his intense, unwavering gaze. She had to say something. She had to push him back, establish a boundary. But the words that came out of her mouth were not her own. They were the words of a woman who knew she had to survive. Thank you for your honesty, Jack, she said, forcing a small, soft smile. And the attraction isn't one-sided. The look of triumph in his eyes was terrifying. He had won. He had found his prize, brought it to his kingdom, and it was performing exactly as he'd hoped. He smiled, a slow, satisfied smile. Good. I'm glad. He backed away, moving toward the door. I'll let you get some rest. Big day tomorrow. Martha wants to show you the gardens. At the door, he turned back one last time. I haven't felt this hopeful about the future in a very long time, Libby. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the silence, the echo of his words hanging in the air. She ran to the door and locked it. A useless gesture. She knew if he wanted to get in, a simple lock wouldn't stop him. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, and for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she let herself cry. They were not tears of gratitude or relief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated terror. She had not been rescued. She had been captured. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Libby played her part perfectly. She was the grateful, dedicated nurse, She smiled at the cowboys, tended their injuries with gentle efficiency, and listened politely as Martha, the cook's wife, showed her the vegetable gardens and the smokehouse. Martha was a stout woman, with kind eyes and a mouth that was always set in a thin, worried line. She was friendly, but distant. Whenever Libby tried to ask about the ranch, about Jack, Martha would find a reason to change the subject. "The boss, he takes good care of us all," she'd say, and then immediately ask about the best way to preserve beans. The cowboys were the same. They were polite to a fault, tipping their hats, calling her Miss Libby. But their eyes followed her everywhere. They were guards, not just ranch hands. She realized it one afternoon when she decided to go for a walk just to clear her head. She hadn't gone more than a quarter-mile from her cabin when one of them, a young man named Dusty, rode up alongside her. "Ma'am," he said, his face impassive, "the boss don't like folks wandering off too far. Could be wolves or cougars." It wasn't a warning, it was a boundary. She was on a leash, and it was only a quarter-mile long. Her relationship with Jack settled into a strange, tense routine. During the day, he was her employer, discussing ranch business, asking her professional opinion on a sick horse or a cowboy's lingering cough. He was always respectful, always kept his distance. But every evening, he would appear on her porch, sometimes with hot chocolate, sometimes with a book he thought she might enjoy, sometimes just to talk. He'd sit in the chair opposite hers, the firelight playing on his handsome face, and he would talk about his dreams for the ranch, his family's history, his philosophies on life. He never touched her. He never said another word about his attraction. But his eyes devoured her. He was courting her, slowly, patiently, like a spider waiting for the fly to exhaust itself. He told her about his first wife, Rebecca. "Fever took her," he said one night, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed sadness. 3 years ago. She was a gentle soul, delicate. This land, it was too hard for her. He looked at Libby, and his eyes burned with a fierce admiration. "But you're not like her, Libby. You're a survivor. You're strong. This land won't break you." He was praising her, but it felt like he was defining her, cataloging her strengths, checking off boxes on a list. The gilded cage was becoming more obvious every day. She noticed that no one ever left the Double T. Supplies were brought in by a freight wagon once a month, but the cowboys who worked for Jack, they were always there. They were like ghosts tied to the land. One rainy afternoon, when Jack and most of the men were out on the range, Libby felt a desperate need to find something, anything, that felt real. Some crack in the perfect facade. On a hunch, she walked to the main house. It was a massive, imposing structure, and she'd never been invited past the main parlor. She found Martha in the kitchen, kneading a mountain of dough. "Martha," Libby began, trying to sound casual, "I left a book in the parlor the other night. Would you mind if I just—" Martha wiped her floury hands on her apron, her eyes darting nervously toward the back of the house. "Of course, Miss Libby. You know where it is." But Libby didn't go to the parlor. She walked down the long, dark hallway that led to the private wing of the house. The air grew colder here. The walls were lined with dark portraits of stern-faced ancestors. At the end of the hall was a single, heavy oak door. It was locked. She rattled the knob. It was solid, unmoving. Why would a room in a house be locked up so tightly? "Miss Libby?" Libby spun around. Martha was standing at the end of the hall, her face pale, her hands twisting in her apron. "The boss. He don't like nobody going back here. That was his wife's room. Rebecca's room, locked up like a tomb." "I'm sorry," Libby said, backing away. "I was just curious." "Curiosity ain't always healthy on the Double T," Martha whispered, her voice so low Libby could barely hear it. Then, her eyes wide with fear, she turned and scurried back to the kitchen. That night, Libby couldn't sleep. Martha's warning echoed in her head. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the ranch pressing in on her. Then she heard it, a sound from outside. A woman's sob. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. A sound of pure, heart-wrenching grief. Libby shot out of bed and ran to the window. The moon was bright, illuminating the ranch yard in stark black and white. There was nothing. No one. Just the empty space between the buildings and the dark, looming shape of the main house. Was she imagining it? Was the loneliness and fear making her hear things? She stayed at the window for nearly an hour, her heart pounding. The sound didn't come again. She tried to convince herself it was the wind, or a coyote, or her own frayed nerves, but she knew what she had heard. The next day, a kind of frantic energy seized her. She had to know more. While tending to a cowboy's gash in her clinic, she found her chance. She kept a small private stash of her own belongings in a locked chest under her bed. Among them was the faded photograph of her parents. She took it out and walked over to the bunkhouse on the pretense of checking on another patient. The walls were lined with pin-ups from magazines, but also with personal photographs. Men with their families, their sweethearts back home. With trembling hands, she found an empty spot and tacked up the picture of her parents. A small piece of her old life, a silent rebellion. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught on a small, dog-eared photo tacked to the wall next to hers. It was a group photo of several cowboys, squinting in the sun. In the back, half hidden, stood Jack Thornton, and beside him, her hand tucked into his arm, was a woman. It wasn't the delicate, gentle soul he had described. This woman was thin, yes, but her eyes were wild, her mouth set in a terrified line. She looked like a trapped animal. Libby felt the blood drain from her face. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was Rebecca, his dead wife, and she looked exactly like Libby. The same height, the same build, the same dark hair. It wasn't just a healer he had been looking for. He had been looking for a replacement. He was trying to rebuild his dead wife, piece by piece. And Libby was the final, most important part. The air in the bunkhouse suddenly felt thick, unbreathable. She backed away from the wall, her eyes still locked on the photograph, on Rebecca's terrified face. Fever didn't take her, Libby thought, a wave of nausea washing over her. She ran. She didn't know where she was going. She just ran from the bunkhouse, past the watchful eyes of the cowboys, across the yard, towards the vast, open plains. She had to get away. The leash was longer than she thought. She made it almost a mile before the hoofbeats sounded behind her. It was Tom Bradley, the foreman, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't say a word. He just rode his horse to block her path, dismounted and grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron. "The boss wants to see you," he said, his voice flat and dead. He dragged her back to the ranch, back to her cabin. Jack was waiting inside, standing by the fireplace, his back to her. When he turned around, his face was calm. His voice was soft, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Where were you going, Libby?" he asked. The dam of her control finally broke. "I saw her!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror and rage. "I saw the picture! Rebecca, you lied to me!" He didn't flinch. He just watched her, a strange, sad smile on his lips. "I never lie, Libby. I told you she was gone, and she is." "What did you do to her?" Libby whispered, backing away from him until she hit the wall. "I loved her," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate, terrifying murmur. "I loved her so much. But she didn't understand. She was weak. She tried to leave me." He took a step closer. "I built this place for her, this paradise. I gave her everything. But she was ungrateful. She tried to run." His eyes were pleading, insane. "I couldn't let her go. You understand that, don't you? When you love someone, you have to protect them. You have to keep them safe. No matter what. Libby stared at him, horrified. The crying she'd heard. It hadn't been a ghost. She's not dead, is she? Libby breathed. She's here. That locked room. That's where you keep her. Jack's smile faded. A look of profound disappointment crossed his face. I had hoped you would be different, Libby. I truly had. I thought you were strong enough to understand, to accept the kind of love I have to give. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. It seems I was mistaken. Suddenly, the yard outside erupted in chaos. Shouts, the sound of galloping horses, a gunshot. Jack's head snapped toward the window. For the first time, she saw a crack in his calm facade. Annoyance, fury. Tom Bradley burst through the door, his face grim. Boss, it's Danny, the kid. Got himself tangled with a new stallion. It's bad. He's been trampled. He's dying. Jack's eyes shot to Libby. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a command, a test. Her mind raced. This was it, her one chance. A dying man, a medical emergency. It was the one scenario where she held all the power, where she was indispensable. She took a deep breath, pushing down her terror, and the nurse took over. Where is he? She asked, her voice cold and steady as steel. Jack's expression shifted again. The disappointment was replaced by a flicker of admiration, of pride. He was looking at his perfect creation, and she was performing flawlessly under pressure. They're bringing him to the bunkhouse, Bradley said. No, Libby snapped, her authority absolute. Bring him here, to the clinic, now. Clear a table. I need boiling water, clean sheets, and all the light you can get. And you, she said, pointing a shaking finger at Tom Bradley. You're going to assist me. Don't you dare faint. She walked past Jack, into her clinic, and began laying out her instruments. The gleaming scalpels, the sutures, the clamps, her tools, her weapons. She could feel his eyes on her back. He was watching, judging. She had to save this boy's life, not just for the boy. She had to save him to prove her value, to buy herself time. Because she knew, with chilling certainty, that if Danny died, she would be taking his place in that locked room at the end of the hall. The clinic filled with the scent of blood and fear. Young Danny was a broken mess on the examination table, his chest a canvas of purple and black, each breath a rattling gasp. The cowboys who had carried him in stood clustered by the door, their faces pale, their eyes wide with horror. They were looking at a dead man. Libby saw something else. She saw a flicker of life, a fighting chance, and she saw her own salvation. Get out, she ordered the cowboys, her voice sharp as a scalpel. All of you but Bradley. I need room to work. They scurried out like frightened mice. Jack remained, a silent statue in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He was the king watching a gladiator perform. Bradley, Libby said, not looking up from her patient. Hold this lamp steady, right here. And if you drop it, I'll use my next suture on you. The grizzled foreman, a man who feared nothing, flinched. He held the lamp, his knuckles white. Libby went to work. The world outside the circle of lamplight ceased to exist. There was only the broken body of the boy, the rhythmic hiss of her own breathing, and the cold, hard steel of her instruments in her hand. She cut into his skin with a steady hand, searching for the source of the internal bleeding that was killing him. It was brutal, bloody work. She clamped bleeders, sponged away pooling blood, her mind a whirlwind of anatomical knowledge. She was no longer Libby, the frightened captive. She was Nurse Montgomery, a master of her craft, a warrior fighting death itself. Hours passed. The lamp sputtered. Bradley's arm trembled with fatigue, but he held it steady. Jack never moved from the doorway. He just watched, his expression unchanging. Finally, she found it, a ruptured artery near the spleen, pumping the boy's life into his chest cavity. With a delicate, precise movement, she clamped it, then began the slow, painstaking work of stitching it closed. She worked until her back ached and her eyes burned. As she placed the last stitch in the boy's skin, she knew. She had done it. She stepped back, her hands covered in blood, her body trembling with exhaustion. Danny's breathing was no longer a rattle. It was shallow, but steady. The deadly pallor of his skin was receding, replaced by a faint flush of life. "He'll live," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. The silence in the room was deafening. Tom Bradley stared at her, his cold eyes filled with a new emotion. Awe. Jack finally moved. He walked into the clinic, his boots silent on the wooden floor. He looked down at the unconscious boy, then at Libby. He reached out and, with his thumb, gently wiped a smear of blood from her cheek. His touch was electric, possessive. "Incredible," he whispered, his voice full of a dark, reverent pride. "You are everything I hoped you would be. More." It wasn't a compliment. It was a confirmation. She had passed his gruesome test. She had proven her worth. She was the perfect replacement for the one who had failed him. Later that night, after Danny was moved to a cot in her cabin for close monitoring, Jack came to her. He didn't knock. He just walked in. He was holding a small velvet box. "What you did tonight, Libby," he said, his voice soft. "It was a miracle. You saved him." "It's my job," she said, her voice flat. She was too tired for fear, too empty for anger. "No," he said. "It's your gift." He stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "I knew you were special from the moment I saw you. I knew you had a strength that Rebecca could only dream of." He opened the box. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay a gold locket. It was beautiful, intricate, and cold. "I love you, Libby," he said, the words a death sentence. She stared at him, her mind a blank wall of exhaustion. Love. He called this love, this obsession, this control, this cage. "I love you too, Jack," she heard herself say. The words were ash in her mouth. But they were the right words, the words that would keep her alive. His face lit up with that breathtaking, terrifying smile. "I knew you would," he said. "I knew you were the one who would finally understand." He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a kiss of ownership, of triumph. It was the seal on a contract she had never agreed to sign. When he pulled back, he was breathing hard. His eyes were blazing with a feverish light. "Marry me, Libby," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the next logical step in his plan. "I know it's fast, but there's no reason to wait. We belong together." He held up a hand before she could speak. "You don't have to answer now. Think about it. But I think you already know the answer, don't you?" He placed the velvet box in her hand and left, closing the door softly behind him. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, the box feeling like a lead weight in her palm. Marry him, become his wife, his property. The new, improved Rebecca. She opened the locket. On one side was a small, empty frame, waiting for her picture. On the other, engraved in delicate script, were 2 words, forever and always. A sob caught in her throat. She sank onto the cot next to the sleeping boy she had just saved, her own life hanging by a thread. She had to escape. But how? The ranch was a fortress. The men were his loyal soldiers, and the nearest town was 20 miles of unforgiving wilderness away. She looked at Danny's peaceful face. She had saved him. But who was going to save her? The wedding was a spectacle. Jack called it a celebration of their love, but Libby knew it was a coronation. His coronation as her king, her keeper. He brought in people from Cheyenne, business associates, the town mayor, the territorial sheriff. He dressed her in a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco, a dress so beautiful it felt like a shroud. He stood beside her on the porch of the main house before a traveling preacher, and smiled as he slipped a heavy gold ring onto her finger. She said, "I do." The words felt like dirt in her mouth. The crowd cheered. The cowboys, her guards, whistled and stomped their feet. They weren't cheering for a bride. They were cheering for their boss, who had successfully captured the rarest prize in the territory. She was Mrs. Jackson Thornton now. She had his name, his ring, his protection. She was more trapped than ever. The main house was now her home, her prison. And at the end of the long, dark hall, the oak door to Rebecca's room remained locked. Jack carried the only key. The first few weeks of her marriage were a waking nightmare. She played the part of the devoted wife, smiling, managing the household, sitting by his side as he entertained guests. But every night, she lay beside him in the massive four-poster bed, rigid with fear, praying for a morning that would bring some glimmer of hope. Her only solace was Danny. The boy was recovering quickly, his gratitude toward her boundless. He followed her around like a puppy, his young face full of hero worship. He was the only one on the ranch whose eyes weren't cold and watchful. He was her patient, and maybe, just maybe, her only potential ally. One evening, Jack was called away to deal with a cattle rustling issue on the far edge of his property. He would be gone overnight. It was the first time she would be truly alone in the house since the wedding. This was her chance. She waited until the house was dark and silent. Martha and her husband were asleep in their small quarters off the kitchen. The cowboys were in the bunkhouse. With a stolen set of lockpicks from her own medical bag, tools meant for removing bullets were surprisingly versatile, she went to the end of the hall. To Rebecca's door. Her hands trembled as she worked the lock. It was old, complex. It took her nearly an hour, the scraping of the metal sounding like thunder in the silent house. Finally, with a soft click, the lock gave way. She pushed the door open. The air that rushed out was stale, musty, filled with the scent of dust and despair. The room was just as she had imagined Martha describing it. A woman's bedroom, filled with delicate furniture, clothes still hanging in the armoire, a silver-backed brush on the vanity. It was a museum of a dead life, but it wasn't empty. On the small writing desk by the window, there was a leather-bound journal. Her heart pounding, Libby lit a candle and opened it. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, but grew more frantic and jagged as the pages turned. It was Rebecca's diary. The first entries were filled with love for Jack, her handsome, powerful husband, her beautiful new home, her perfect life. Then, the tone began to change. October 12th. Jack seems displeased. I mentioned I missed my sister in Texas. He grew so quiet. He told me I have everything I need right here, that he is all the family I need now. November 4th. A letter came from Mama. Jack brought it to me, but I saw him holding it up to the light first. When I asked him about it, he just smiled and said he wanted to make sure it was good news. He doesn't like me being sad. January 9th. I tried to ride to Cheyenne, just for some new ribbon. Tom Bradley stopped me at the edge of the valley. He said the boss wouldn't like it. He said it wasn't safe for me. I feel like a bird in a cage. The entries grew more desperate. Rebecca wrote of Jack's suffocating attention, his control over her every move, his terrifying jealousy. She wrote about his rages, which came out of nowhere, followed by days of suffocating, remorseful affection. Then came the final terrifying entry. March 2nd. He knows I want to leave. I see it in his eyes. He calls it my sickness. He says he has to cure me of it. He brought Dr. Harrison from Cheyenne to see me. He said the doctor would give me something to calm my nerves. But Dr. Harrison's eyes, they were full of pity. He tried to slip me a note. Jack saw it. He threw the doctor out. He told me some men can't be trusted around a beautiful woman. Libby's blood ran cold. Dr. Harrison, her Dr. Harrison. He hadn't been in Wyoming by chance. He had been here before. He had seen what Jack was, what he did. the story she'd been told about him back in Philadelphia. Had it all been a lie constructed by Jack to discredit the one man who knew his secret? She flipped to the last page. The ink was smeared, as if written in a great hurry. He's locked the door. He says it's for my own good, until the sickness passes. He says he loves me too much to ever let me go. I have to get out. There is a loose board beneath the window. I can get through. I have to run. If anyone ever finds this, my name is Rebecca Thornton. Don't let him replace me. Don't let him. The sentence was unfinished. Libby dropped the diary as if it were on fire. Rebecca hadn't died of a fever. She hadn't been locked in this room forever. She had escaped. Or she had tried to. Libby ran to the window. She knelt down and felt along the floorboards. Just as the diary said, one of them was loose. She pried it up with her fingers. Underneath was not a hollow space. It was packed with dry, disturbed earth, and nestled in the dirt was a single, small, muddy object, a woman's boot. Libby scrambled backwards, a scream building in her throat. Rebecca hadn't escaped. She was right here, buried beneath the floor of her own bedroom, her tomb. I see you found my wife's diary. Libby spun around. Jack was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of cold, calm fury. He hadn't gone to the edge of the ranch at all. It had been another test, a trap, and she had walked right into it. She was so ungrateful, he said, his voice a low, sad whisper. He took a step into the room. I gave her a kingdom, and all she wanted was freedom. I had to cure her of that desire. But the cure, it didn't take. He looked down at the loose floorboard, then back at Libby, his eyes full of a terrible, suffocating love. But you're different, Libby. You're strong. You won't make the same mistake. You understand, don't you? You understand what true love requires. He was closing the door. He was locking her in. I'm not her! Libby screamed, scrambling away from him. No, he said, his voice full of pity. You're not! You're so much better! Then the lock clicked shut, plunging the room into darkness, leaving Libby alone with the ghost of the woman she had replaced and the chilling realization that the same fate awaited her. The next sound she heard was a hammer, pounding nails into the other side of the door. He was sealing her in. Forever. For 2 days, she was in the dark. The tomb. He slid food and water through a small slot at the bottom of the door, the kind used for asylum inmates. He didn't speak. He just left the trays, silent offerings to his caged bird. Libby didn't scream. She didn't beat on the door. She knew it was useless. He wanted her to break. He wanted her to become a whimpering, dependent creature who lived only for the sound of his footsteps. She would not give him the satisfaction. Instead, she thought. She planned. She used the darkness to sharpen her mind. She paced the room, memorizing its dimensions. She felt along the walls, the furniture, searching for a weakness, a weapon. And she thought about Dr. Harrison, the man she had hated, the man who had ruined her life. He hadn't been the villain of her story. He had been its first victim. He had seen Jack's madness and tried to warn Rebecca. Then he'd seen the same pattern starting with her. The broken nose, the scandal. It had all been a desperate, clumsy attempt to make her flee, to get her away from Wyoming, away from Jack. On the third day, the hammering started again. He was removing the nails. The lock turned. The door swung open. Jack stood there, bathed in the light from the hall. He looked tired, his face drawn. He had expected her to be hysterical, broken. Instead, she was standing calmly in the center of the room, her eyes clear and defiant. He was disappointed. "I've brought you a visitor," he said, his voice flat. He stepped aside, and Tom Bradley pushed a man into the room. The man stumbled and fell to his knees. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. It was Dr. Harrison. "He came back," Jack said, as if explaining the behavior of a stray dog. Came to the sheriff in Cheyenne with some wild story about me, about you, about Rebecca. He shook his head in mock sadness. No one believed him, of course, a disgraced drunk. But I couldn't have him upsetting you. Harrison looked up at Libby, his eyes full of a desperate warning. "Run!" he croaked, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "He's a monster!" Jack sighed and delivered a swift kick to Harrison's ribs. The doctor cried out and curled into a ball. "Now," Jack said, turning his attention back to Libby. His voice was soft, reasonable. "This is a problem, a loose end. It upsets the harmony of our home." He looked from the beaten doctor to Libby. "But you, my dear, you are a healer. You fix things that are broken." A cold, horrifying understanding dawned on Libby. "He is sick," Jack continued. "His mind is filled with delusions. He is a danger to our happiness. He needs treatment, a permanent cure." He walked over to the vanity and picked up Rebecca's silver-backed hairbrush. He held it out to Libby. "You are a woman of medicine. You know how to end suffering. Show me you understand. Show me your loyalty. Fix this." He wanted her to kill him, to bash in Harrison's skull with the brush, just as Rebecca might have, to become his accomplice, to bind herself to him with blood. Libby looked at the terrified, broken man on the floor. She looked at the heavy silver brush in Jack's hand, and she looked into the placid, insane eyes of her husband. This was her final test, her initiation. She slowly reached out and took the brush. It was heavy in her hand, solid. She walked over to where Dr. Harrison lay whimpering on the floor. He flinched, trying to crawl away. "Please," he begged. Libby looked up at Jack. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face, a perfect imitation of his own. "You're right, my love," she said, her voice dripping with false adoration. "He is a sickness, and he needs to be cured." She raised the brush high above her head. Harrison squeezed his eyes shut. And then she spun around, faster than a striking snake, and brought the heavy silver brush down with all her might, not on Harrison's head, but on Jack's outstretched hand. The crack of breaking bones echoed in the small room. Jack roared, a sound of pure shock and agony, stumbling back, clutching his shattered hand. He had never, in his entire life, conceived of the fact that she might defy him, that his perfect, compliant prize might have teeth. In that split second of his surprise, Libby acted. "Danny!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Now!" It was a gamble, a desperate long shot. She had been secretly talking to the boy during his recovery, planting seeds of doubt, appealing to the life debt he felt he owed her. She had told him to listen, to wait for her signal. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, the world outside the room exploded. A shotgun blast echoed through the house, shattering the windows in the hall. Shouts, the sound of running feet. Danny had done it. He hadn't just been waiting. He had rallied the few younger cowboys who weren't part of Jack's inner circle, men who were scared of their boss, but not yet completely broken by him. Tom Bradley, who had been standing guard outside the door, drew his pistol, but before he could fire, Dr. Harrison, with a surge of adrenaline, launched himself forward, tackling the foreman at the knees. They went down in a heap. Libby didn't wait. She grabbed a heavy glass perfume bottle from the vanity and threw it at the lamp in the hall, plunging the scene into chaos and darkness. She grabbed Harrison's arm. "Come on!" They scrambled out of the room, over the struggling bodies of Bradley and Harrison, and into the pandemonium of the house. Danny was there, a smoking shotgun in his hands, his face pale but determined. "The horses are ready at the south barn," he yelled. They ran, out the back of the house, into the cold night air. The ranch was in an uproar. Gunshots were coming from the bunkhouse as Jack's loyalists fought Danny's small band of rebels. It was the diversion she needed. They reached the south barn. 3 horses were saddled and waiting. Libby, Harrison, and Danny leaped into the saddles. "Go!" Libby yelled. "Ride for Cheyenne! Tell the sheriff everything!" They spurred their horses, bursting from the barn and into the open, galloping toward the edge of the valley, toward the promise of freedom. But as they crested the first hill, Libby looked back. A single figure stood silhouetted against the lights of the main house. Jack Thornton. He was clutching his broken hand, but he was standing tall. And even from this distance, she could feel the heat of his rage, the force of his obsession. This wasn't over. He would not just let her go. He would hunt her. A new kind of terror, cold and sharp, pierced through her elation. She hadn't just escaped a prison. She had unleashed a monster. The ride to Cheyenne was a 20-mile race against death. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Libby pushed her horse harder, the icy air burning her lungs. Dr. Harrison, weak and injured, struggled to keep up. Young Danny rode between them, his shotgun across his lap, his head constantly turning, scanning the darkness behind them. They didn't dare stop. They knew Jack would not be far behind. He and his men knew this land like the back of their hand. They were predators in their own domain. They thundered into Cheyenne just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking, their horses lathered in sweat, their faces grim. They went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a portly man named Miller, whom Libby had seen smiling at her wedding, was skeptical. Jackson Thornton was the most powerful man in the territory, a benefactor, a gentleman. This wild story from a half-dead doctor, a scared ranch hand, and Thornton's own hysterical new bride, it sounded like nonsense. "Now, Mrs. Thornton," he said placatingly, "maybe you and the mister just had a little spat. Why don't you have some coffee and calm down?" "There is a woman buried under the floorboards of his house," Libby shrieked, her control finally shattering. "His first wife, Rebecca, he beat this man," she gestured to Harrison, "and he would have made me kill him. He is insane." Her hysteria, her raw terror, was more convincing than any calm testimony. Sheriff Miller looked at Dr. Harrison's battered face, at the grim determination in Danny's eyes, and at the wild, terrified look of a woman who had seen hell. A seed of doubt was planted. "All right," he said slowly, standing up. "I'll gather a few deputies. We'll ride out to the Double T and ask Mr. Thornton a few questions." But it was too late. Just then, the doors to the office burst open. It was Jack. He wasn't wild-eyed or raging. He was calm, composed, his left arm in a clean white sling. He was flanked by Tom Bradley and 3 of his most loyal men. They were all armed. His eyes found Libby, and he smiled. A slow, sad, loving smile that made her blood run cold. "My darling," he said, his voice a balm of reasonableness. "You had me so worried, running off in the middle of the night like that." He looked at the sheriff. "My wife is not well, Sheriff. She has fantasies, terrible nightmares. She's been under a great deal of strain." He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Libby. "Come home, Libby. Let me take care of you. Let me make you well again." It was a nightmare. He was twisting everything, painting her as the crazy one, him as the concerned husband. The sheriff was wavering, his hand hovering near his gun, unsure of who to believe. "He's lying," Harrison croaked from his chair. "Check his house. Check Rebecca's room." Jack's smile tightened. "The poor man is delirious. My wife's delusions seem to be contagious." He took another step toward Libby. "It's all right, my love. The bad dream is over now. Come with me." He was going to take her, right here, in front of the law, and no one was going to stop him. Libby backed away, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Her hand went instinctively to the small medical kit she always wore on her belt, a habit she'd never broken. Her fingers brushed against a small vial, carbolic acid, a powerful antiseptic, a corrosive poison. It was a desperate, insane idea, but it was the only one she had. "Stay away from me," she whispered, her hand closing around the vial. Jack kept coming, his eyes full of that suffocating love. "Don't fight it, Libby. We belong together. Forever and always. He reached for her. She uncorked the vial. She didn't throw it at him. That was what he would expect. Instead, she spun around and threw the acid not at Jack, but at the massive oil lamp hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room. The glass shattered. The acid ate through the brass casing. Oil and flaming wick rained down onto the wooden floorboards, which were dry as tinder. The room erupted in flames. Pandemonium. The deputies shouted, scrambling for the water buckets. Tom Bradley and Jack's men drew their guns, confused by the sudden chaos. In that moment, Libby grabbed the sheriff's heavy pistol from his holster. She didn't point it at Jack. She pointed it at her own head. "Everybody stop!" she screamed, her voice ringing out over the roar of the fire. The room froze. Jack, his men, the deputies, everyone stared at her. "Libby, no," Jack breathed, his calm finally breaking, a flicker of genuine panic in his eyes, his prize, his perfect creation. He couldn't stand to see it destroyed. "One more step, and I swear I'll do it," she said, her voice shaking but her hand steady on the trigger. "You won't have me, Jack. You won't lock me away. I'd rather be dead." The fire was spreading, climbing the walls, smoke filling the room. They were running out of time. "She's bluffing, boss!" Tom Bradley snarled, raising his pistol. Before he could fire, a shot rang out. Not from Libby's gun. Danny. The boy stood near the door, the sheriff's shotgun in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. Tom Bradley stared down at his chest, a look of surprise on his face as a dark red stain spread across his shirt. He crumpled to the floor. The standoff was broken. The sheriff and his deputies finally chose a side, drawing their weapons on Jack's remaining men. "It's over, Thornton," the sheriff yelled. "Drop your weapons." But Jack only had eyes for Libby. The fire, his men, the law, none of it mattered. Only she did. The object of his obsession. "You would really do it?" he asked, his voice full of a strange, wounded curiosity. "You would destroy yourself rather than accept my love?" "This isn't love," Libby spat, tears streaming down her smoke-stained face. "It's a disease, and I am the cure." She didn't pull the trigger. She didn't have to. With a deep groan, the flaming ceiling beam directly above Jack gave way. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, a split second before it came crashing down, burying him in a shower of fire and splintered wood. The fire consumed him. It consumed the office. It consumed the legend of Jackson Thornton, the gentleman rancher. Sheriff Miller grabbed Libby, pulling her toward the door as the roof began to collapse. They stumbled out into the street, choking on the smoke, just as the entire building went up in a roar of flame. Libby stood on the dusty street of Cheyenne, the borrowed pistol still clutched in her hand, and watched her prison burn. She was free, she was alive, and she was utterly, completely alone. The fire that consumed Jackson Thornton cleansed Cheyenne of his shadow. When the ashes cooled, they found his body, and later, acting on Libby's testimony, a posse rode to the Double T. They unearthed the pathetic, broken remains of Rebecca from beneath the floor of her gilded cage. The story exploded across the territory. The Millionaire Cowboy wasn't a romantic hero, he was a monster. The Double T Ranch wasn't a paradise, it was a fortress built by a madman. The whispers changed from admiration to horror. Libby Thornton, the woman who had twice been at the center of a scandal, was finally seen for what she was, a survivor. Jack's immense fortune, his cattle, his land, his railroad investments, with no other heirs, it all passed to his widow. Libby was suddenly one of the wealthiest women in the American West. But she wanted none of it. She sold the Double T, she sold the cattle. She liquidated every asset tied to the Thornton name, a name that tasted like poison. She made sure Danny was rewarded for his bravery, setting him up with his own small, prosperous ranch far away from the ghosts of Wyoming. She paid for Dr. Harrison's medical care and provided him with enough money to start a new life in California, away from the whispers and the pity. Then, she vanished. For years, people wondered what had become of the famous nurse of the Double T. Some said she went back east, unable to face the wildness of the frontier. Others said she'd lost her mind and lived in seclusion. They were all wrong. Libby didn't run from her past. She used it as fuel. She took the Thornton fortune and she traveled to Philadelphia. Not as a victim, but as a force of nature. She bought the old charity hospital where her nightmare had begun. She tore it down and built a new one in its place, the Elizabeth Montgomery Hospital for Women. It was a sanctuary, a place where no woman would ever have her word questioned, her safety threatened, or her voice silenced. She established a foundation, using the vast wealth to create shelters and offer legal aid to women trapped in situations like the one she had escaped. Her name was no longer synonymous with scandal, but with strength and salvation. She never married again. She had loved once, and it had almost destroyed her. She dedicated her life not to one man, but to thousands of women she would never meet. Years later, a young, ambitious reporter tracked her down. He found her not in a fancy office, but in one of the hospital wards, sitting with a young woman who had come in with a broken arm and a story she was too afraid to tell. The reporter asked Libby, now a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen everything, if she ever thought about Jack Thornton. Libby looked up from the young woman's bedside, her gaze clear and steady. "Every day," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I think about him every time a woman walks through those doors. He thought he could own me. He thought he could break me and remake me in the image of his obsession." She gave a small, sad smile. "In the end, he did remake me, but not into his creation. I became my own." The legend of Jack and Libby Thornton is still told in Wyoming, but it's not the love story that was once whispered around campfires. It's a darker tale, a cautionary one, a story about a monster who wore a gentleman's face and the woman who refused to be his victim. It's a story of survival, of courage, and of a love so toxic it could only be cleansed by fire. They say that love can conquer all, but sometimes love is the very thing that must be conquered. If you were gripped by Libby's fight for survival, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the dark tales we have coming next.